what we do. Okay.
You never know, it might be on the walls as well.
Good afternoon. Hello to everyone in this room and those watching online. My name is Lisa Jörke and I work with Climate Alliance Germany. As Climate Alliance Germany and FENRO, the Association of Development and Humanitarian Organizations in Germany, I'd like to give a warm welcome to this side event on human mobility in the context of the climate crisis, how German climate policy can address the protection gap here in the German Climate Pavilion. The climate crisis is becoming a bigger driver of displacement and forced migration by the day. Be it people displaced after a sudden extreme weather event, or others forced to leave their home after a drought has wrought the last drop of water from their land. Yet human mobility in the climate crisis does not get the sufficient attention, legal frameworks, policy, or financial support needed to address it. Climate Alliance Germany and FENRO are working together on a new position paper on this very subject, which will be published in a couple of months. And I am very happy that this important issue is getting some additional attention today with a fantastic panel that will be discussing just that. With this, I'd like to welcome you once more and hand over to Sabine Minninger from Bread for the World.
Hello, thank you very much, Lisa. My name is Sabine Minninger. I'm a senior policy advisor on climate change with the German development organization called Bread for the World. And I'm very delighted that I have the honor to chair the session here today. And I would like to welcome our distinguished panelists. Here on my right, it's Reverend James Bhagwan, General Secretary of the Pacific Conference of Churches in Fiji. I visited you in your office already 2 times. And so I know pretty well what you are dealing with. And next to him, it's Dr. Mitika Wenda. He's the Executive Director of the Pan-African Climate Justice Alliance from Kenya. Welcome, Mitika. We're happy that you are with us here today. And on my left, there is Pia von Ackern. She's the Policy Advisor at the Division Climate and Security, Geopolitics of Climate Change and Water Diplomacy Unit at the German Federal Foreign Office. And here, next to her, it's not Atle Solberg, definitely not. No, it's Oliviane Wohlhauser. She's a policy advisor with the platform on disaster displacement in Geneva. Atle had, unfortunately, a short notice time problem, and if he will come later, he might join us on a panel. But I must say, Oliviane, we are very happy that you were so flexible and jumped in. And then we have another panelist here. It's Vera Künzel. And here we can all see you, Vera, now. And Vera is a Senior Policy Advisor on Climate Change, Adaptation and Human Rights with the German organization German Watch. So Vera, you are with us now here from Bonn. And I would love to hand over now to the first we hear now some presentations and followed by a panel discussion. And of course, there will also be a question and answer round where you can all actively engage. Please, James, the floor is yours. You are the first one who will give a presentation on the situation of human mobility in the Pacific context.
Thank you, Sabine, and good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be with you today. The Pacific Conference of Churches has been engaged in the work of climate justice for well over 2 decades. It's been, next year we mark 20 years since our first major declaration on climate change by Pacific Church leaders. And if we could, we have the slides up, great. So very briefly, I want to talk about the journey that we are trying to engage in the shift for climate justice, particularly in the area of climate-induced displacement, relocation, and migration. We can call it climate mobility. And to recognize why we are calling it a voyage from exile to exodus. Yep, if I can get the screen to the next slide. That would be good. Okay. This is the current context in our region with climate change. Rising sea levels and extreme weather continues to push our people further and further from the coasts. If they live on low-lying atolls, we will find them struggling to find where to move to. And this is land that they have called home for thousands of years. This is where we say we have a deep sense of connection. And so this is the current reality that we face in our Pacific region. The low-lying coral atolls, experiencing it more profoundly, but for the bigger islands, those who live on coasts are slowly finding their communities eroded. I mean, you just have to look at that third photo. If it's a hotel, perhaps it's nice to have the water right outside your door, but if this is your daily living, you can see the rocks in the background are what the seawall used to be. So that was the shoreline before, and things are changing. If we could have the next slide. So since 2009, the Pacific Conference of Churches, which has a constituency of about 80% of the Pacific population, covering 19 Pacific Island countries and territories, made a declaration, the Moana Declaration. And Moana is a Polynesian word for ocean. And here we were charged charged with the responsibility to engaging in the issue of relocation, displacement, relocation, and migration, and looking at what that meant. So since 2019, we have been working in this space, accompanying communities that have to relocate, looking at the issues that surround relocation, and what sort of models and processes we can support, both at a local community level, but also at national and regional level as well. This is a story, this image basically tells of our relationship with nature. For Pacific people and many indigenous communities, we have a strong spiritual connection, not only in terms of faith, but with the land as well. And so when we see our homes destroyed, that's one thing. But when we see the land destroyed as well as a result of extreme weather, of cyclones, which are now normally Category 5 cyclones. And this year already, the cyclone season began in November for us. We've already have 2 cyclones and also flash flooding. So for our people, they are already experiencing cultural trauma as a result of the impact of climate change on the land. So that is already happening. Dealing with that cultural trauma, now they have to deal with the fact that they have to move away from their homes. And so if we look at our Pacific way of how we engage with life, when a child is born in the Pacific, in most Pacific Island countries, and that little piece of umbilical cord that is left when they're born finally drops off, we have many cultural protocols in which that umbilical cord is buried in the land with a seedling, a coconut seedling or an indigenous tree of some kind. And that symbolizes that the child is now part of the land. So from a very early age, Pacific people learn and see the world from that perspective. They are rooted to the land of their birth, to that place of birth. And slowly those places are now becoming underwater as sea levels continue to rise. You see here our cemeteries, our grave sites, which are slowly eroding. And we have communities in the Pacific now where many cemeteries are underwater. And as communities have to leave, they are leaving the land that they are connected to, they're leaving the land where their ancestors are buried. And so this is another part of that grief process that they are dealing with. What are the cultural processes for leaving your land and moving to another land? What are the cultural processes that need to be experienced when you move to somebody else's land? And as we know, in many communities where there are indigenous people, there are protocols that are involved, and we have to make sure that those are paid attention to. So for us, when we look at the issue of climate-induced migration, we have those who will not or cannot leave. They do not want to leave the place of their birth. They do not want to leave where their loved ones are buried. They refuse to leave. Or maybe they cannot leave. They are not able to afford to move. Maybe they suffer from disabilities. Maybe they have no other source of livelihood in terms of where they live, and they get their sustenance from the sea and from the land, and they have to move somewhere where there is no access for that livelihood. And how do we work with those who have to move? And we have framed this often in the context of non-economic loss and damage. So how do we shift from exile to exodus? From this feeling of being displaced and alienated to one that brings hope of a new land or a new home and a possible new future. Our Pacific, while we have been in our islands for thousands of years, we are a voyaging community. So we reach back in time to our history of journeying over the big oceans, crossing the Pacific to find new homes. And we try and use that as a way of encouraging us to say that journeying is part of who we are. And migration and mobility is also a part of who we are. These are our traditional voyaging canoes from our traditional societies, where we are trying to revive that culture of voyaging and journeying. Just in November this year, Pacific leaders adopted the Pacific Regional Framework on Climate Mobility. The Pacific Conference of Churches was part of the group that worked to develop with the International Organization on Migration, the UN Human Rights Office, and other partners and states to develop a proactive approach to climate mobility. Let me say this first and foremost: our people do not want to leave. They don't want to leave their homes, right? Our leaders do not want them to leave. But this is something that we have to have ready in case we have to leave. We are still fighting for that 1.5, but we are practical people. We live in hope, but we know that as sea level continues to rise, we need to start looking at both internal and external mobility. In our cultures, we have a culture of hospitality. We welcome the stranger. We welcome those who come seeking a place to call home. We offer a mat for them to sleep. We make them feel part of the community. And so, whether it is from a biblical perspective, as a very strongly Christian region, we are reminded that we are called to look after our people. We'll look after those who are strangers, give hospitality. That is something common in all the Abrahamic faiths and in many religions around the world. But what is important for us are the protocols that we need to develop, that we need to take into account indigenous and spiritual protocols and processes. That the process of migration is not just one of uprooting communities, but of transplanting, a holistic, a healthy process. And I use the image of the tree to see how carefully we can move a tree when we have to. We need to apply that same kind of thinking to moving communities as well. And these are the processes that we need to think about and the resources that will be required when we start to engage in this future, unfortunate future of climate-induced migration. I end with this quote from our indigenous communities. The mat can be used as a sail for our canoes. It can be woven into a basket where we practice hospitality and sharing and reciprocity with our communities. But the mat also symbolizes our home. So what we are looking for is ways in which we can take that mat and move our people in a way that continues to affirm life for them. Thank you very much.
Thank you, James. Applause for you. I also benefited from this hospitality in Fiji. I can just underline that. I have many questions to you. I'm sure many people have also questions to you. We postpone that to the Q&A, and do not waste time now, lose time, not waste, lose time, and give the floor now to Mitika. And Mitika, please, can you give us an insight from the an African perspective, how you're dealing there with the impacts of climate change and to the people who are impacted? Please.
So thank you, Sabine, and a great pleasure for really inviting me to share my perspectives in this very important subject. This is the second time I'm doing this because we had just the same subject during the UN General Assembly in New York, and I think it's good to continue this conversation. I was also to appreciate when you invited me. I told the whole alliance of PAGJA to accompany us because most of them are actually feeling the impacts of climate change wherever they are, whether they're North Africa, West Africa, Southern Africa. So just as an appreciation, I want to really acknowledge you. And can we have just have our delegation people who are here just to stand up just for appreciation so that we can appreciate you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. And that's how passionate we are. You see it. That's how passionate we are, Sabine, and we really value the work which you are doing. We value the work which the government of Germany is doing. Really, we need to elevate the issue of mobility, the issue of climate change. This is swept up the carpet, and we really need to see how we can walk the talk. And when you asked me to build a case for scaled-up finance, and the implementation of the protocol, of the regional protocols, I really was just looking at what does this mean in practice. Just to mention that, as my brother, Reverend, has mentioned, we have these issues, the rising sea levels, and as you can see, they are sweeping the whole Pacific. But not only on that, but also you see in Africa, the tropical cyclone. In Zimbabwe, we have Southern Africans here, they are feeling it. We have my friends from Mauritius who are feeling it. Thousands are already displaced, and you can see the numbers actually. We are not just saying this is just, we have the numbers. And that's where I really like what the work which you are doing in terms of documenting this, because this is what's going to build our case on our work. But because then that has been mentioned, I also want to mention yes, on the other extreme in the waters, you see what has happened. But when it is dry, when there is drought, look at this is what's happening, and just a quick a snapshot of what happens when that happens. For instance, in early 2023, pastoralist communities have lost their camels, cattle, goats, and sheep in thousands, if not millions, in the Horn of Africa. At least 36.1 million people affected by droughts, which began in 2020, 24.1 million in Ethiopia, 7.8 million in Somalia, 4.8 million in Kenya. So this is, we have even my colleagues from Sahel region who are here, which have experienced that. And then all these tropical cyclones. But now, the same people who were experiencing that when we were living in Nairobi, I can tell you they are marooned in devastating floods. So these people will never have peace. They are displaced either by water or by drought. These are now the stark impacts of the changing climate. And so I'm just going to jump the trends which are happening, because that really has been outlined. But the picture is very, very bad. And if you see those who come, I have colleagues from Alende from South Sudan right now who cannot even access their airport here because of that displacement is climate related. Even the war in Darfur is, UNEP has really done quite a study on climate and security and that conflict. Vulnerabilities of communities is very stark, particularly the indigenous communities, as my brother here has said. And so then, in terms of then what we need to do is how do we cut emissions? How do we invest in adaptation, in the loss and damage? But it means implementation of these actions and freeing most of the money, as the campaign which we are doing is really talking more than double, not even double, because the discussion here is the doubling of adaptation finance. If we ask negotiators what is the baseline of that doubling and the adaptation, they will not tell you. And then more importantly, which are the sectors which this doubling or adaptation is going to go. But we believe that this is, if it goes to really build adaptation for displaced people, that will be the first beginning. So in terms of then regional protocols in addressing climate-induced mobility, so they are potentially reactive approaches responding to effects rather than the root cause, which is really maladaptation. So I will mention a number of them, like the Sustainable Development Goal 10, Target 7, to facilitate orderly, safe, regular and responsible migration and mobility of people, including those through the implementation of planned and well-managed migration policies. And I think a government like Germany is quite keen on that. And we have in conversation even at African Union level, the EU-Africa partnership, all those German plays very important role in even Africa's security. It supports Africa with security interventions in a big way. So this, we have been talking with the African Union to see how this can be done and include climate change. The problem is we work there, that silo working, that they are not talking with each other. Those who work on climate change, those who work in climate security or security, they work in isolation. But there is, in the Horn of Africa, the IGAD protocol is the first to protect people moving to neighboring countries before, during, or after environmental threats, and to allow them to remain until it's safe to return. It is, in its preamble, the protocol recognizes the positive contribution that free movement of persons can have in mitigating the impacts of disasters. And I think this is why we as the civil society established the Horn of Africa Climate Security Working Group, which we have elevated to ClimSec Africa to include other sections of Africa. And I think we want to see how we can work Breath for the World and other actors so that we can elevate some of those platforms for the interest of the people who are being affected. And then there is also the Kampala Ministerial Declaration on Migration, Environment and Climate Change, adopted in July 2022 for an integrated approach to climate-induced mobility and contributing to raising the important topic of human mobility in the context of climate change. And then also the Nansen Initiative, still talking about the same. And then the issue then of for me, it is the messages. We need to address the gap, the protection gap, and the challenges of climate-induced migration, which requires urgent global action in terms of policy, and I'm happy that is being addressed by Germany, but we have to really do that at the EU level and even at UN level, and the UN as the mechanism to do also this. Climate financing must flow at speed to most the people at risk, particularly to help them adapt, and then it is not enough to adapt, but rich developed countries must cap emission because that is what is causing climate crisis. Let me mention lastly one thing, that Sabine, I believe that as an African, I'm based an African based in Kenya. So when I'm in this platform, I'm not Mithika from Kenya. I represent Pan-African Climate Justice Alliance. So we want to see how we are very keen, and that's why all this group was very keen really to listen what is happening elsewhere. We are interconnected. Whether you are in Fiji, whether you are in undeveloped countries like Germany, whether you are in marooned community like in where I come from in northeastern Kenya, in Maasai community, all of us are human beings. How do we make ourselves adapt? How do we make the health of the planet better? So thank you very much, and thanks again for inviting us to this very important program.
Thank you, Mitika, for your intervention. It's heartbreaking, really, to hear from the first-hand experience how badly African continent is impacted by climate change, brutally impacted by climate change, and at the same time, they have the least access to adaptation finance, which is highly unfair. And that's something that needs to be fixed. You pointed out already Germany's role in that, an important role that Germany can play. And we want to discuss this here with German civil society and also with government representatives. And Vera, I know that you will touch on that. What could be Germany's role on that? What is our expectation as civil societies on the policy frameworks that they can improve actually and help support the people who are least responsible for climate change but have to carry the burden already. Vera, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I hope you can hear me well. Good afternoon also from my side, and a very warm welcome to all of you in Dubai. Thank you, first of all, for the previous inputs. It's, I think, really highly valuable to get those very good impressions on what it means on the ground and in practice, what we are talking about here. And I think we got very good impressions of how affected countries or how countries are affected and what those countries are at the same time already do to manage those challenges. So thank you very much. I try to focus a bit on the German role here, but we'll start with a short background. Therefore, the first slide, please. Yes, just as a very short background, we all know that the connection between climate change and migration patterns has been proven scientifically for a very long time. The IPCC has pointed towards this connection already in the 90s, so it's not a very new phenomenon. But of course, science gets more concrete here, and we see in the latest IPCC report that climate change is altering migration patterns. This link gets clearer than ever. And of course, also the link between climate change and migration as it is estimated to be much more direct than in previous versions of the IPCC. We know it is a very complex challenge, but we also know the effects for a very long time. So really urgently time to take action. Maybe a short note on the numbers of people affected. We have the Internal Displacement Monitoring Center, and it is publishing reports every year, and they are focusing on those people displaced internally within their home countries, which is really important also in the case of climate-induced human mobility. And in their latest report, they came to the fact that in 2021 alone, there have been 22.3 million people displaced within the borders of their home countries, due to weather-related natural disasters such as storms, droughts, heat waves, and others. And this is around 1.5 times as many as migrants are displaced due to conflict. I find that a very important relation to make clear how severe the challenge is and the problem is. And on a legal note, we know that, of course, consequences of climate change and the impacts on affected people do not count as reasons to flee within the meaning of the Geneva Refugee Convention. So we know it is not applicable here, and this leads to real protection gap for those people who are displaced cross borders. They do not fall under the protection mandate. We all know that. And we know also that there's lacking support for those people displaced internally, and of course also for those who are trapped, who cannot move, who are really not able to move into better circumstances. We have, of course, also regional approaches like the Kampala Convention and the Pacific Regional Framework that James has been spoken about. But there's also questions. Apart from that, questions of status that are becoming increasingly relevant, and we think that Germany and other countries should really deal with them in a conceptual way and with foresight, because the challenge will not be, will not disappear, and it will be more pressing in the future. And we see some interesting developments on the international level here. So we know the GRC, the Geneva Convention, is not applicable, but we, however, also see humanitarian reasons are playing increasingly important role. With regard, for example, to the violation of applicable human rights treaties, there has been an assessment by the UN Human Rights Committee in 2020. This was in regards to a citizen from Kiribati who called on the Human Rights Committee after a decision that he had to leave New Zealand. And even if it has been, it has been assessed that the decision was legal in that regard, the Human Rights Committee also made the assessment that in principle, climate impacts can lead to displacement in the future, and that also legal recourse could be created for those protected persons, at least in terms of a ban of deportation or non-refoulement rule that comes into play here. And this is interesting as a development and we don't know where it would lead, but it is still very interesting to hear. And there's also another fact that is interesting in terms of German legal developments, maybe. There has been an investigation by a German judge, and she found that German courts are already including environmental conditions in the review of deportation decisions. For example, with regard to extreme weather events like droughts, which then result into water and food shortages. That has been the case in Afghanistan, in Iraq, and Somalia. This is also interesting from our point of view, and we would like to see that taken into account. The next slide, please. On that background of that situation, as Lisa mentioned, the civil society umbrella organizations or organizations organized in those umbrella organizations, the Climate Alliance or Klimaallianz Deutschland and Venro, are working at the moment on an updated paper with demands to the German government on human mobility in the context of the climate crisis. And I would like to try to focus here a bit on the most important parts regarding the climate policy. So we know that polluted states have the moral obligation to support people who are affected and who are forced to leave, forced to move. And the most important thing is to ensure self-determination and dignity, as well as ensure that safe and secure migration in general is possible, and that human rights, of course, are always respected. The focus must be, from our perspective, on the protection of people, and where possible, of course, providing preventative support. So, for example, before people have to leave, preparing migration movements, and regardless whether people have to migrate within their home countries, as it is very often the case, but also to neighboring countries or to other regions, such as Germany or other countries. And from our perspective, that means that the German government should, first of all, of course, fulfill its obligations under international agreements and support people who are displaced and forced to migrate, and support the work of those agreements, like, for example, the Global Compact on Migration, which was a big success to have the issue covered here also within migration policy. But we also see here that, or the first review of the GCM has shown that, the challenge of climate-induced migration has to be taken more serious as a already existing challenge and not something in the future. Of course, also the work of the platform on disaster displacement, the successor of the Nansen Initiative, which was the very first attempt to come to state-led solutions here. And we have a representative, we have Olivia here, I don't want to talk about that more in detail, therefore, looking forward to your inputs later. And of course, why we are all here in the UNFCCC context, the task force on displacement, but also the different other bodies which are very much important here. We would ask for cross-policy approaches, and we think it is very important to enable effective participation of the affected communities, also of civil society organizations, and promote solutions at the local level following a human rights-based approach. Of course, as also Mitika pointed out, we need the full implementation of the Paris Agreement and the limit to 1.5 degree, which means keeping impacts somehow manageable, including, of course, the challenge of human-induced mobility. We think that we need, the German government should provide additional humanitarian funding for disaster risk reduction, capacity building through, for example, forecast-based financing, but also increasing the share of adaptation financing, as Mitika also already pointed out. And ensure, that was something I've written down before yesterday, as you can see, ensure the operationalization of the Loss and Damage Fund and make a substantial contribution. And that decision has been taken yesterday, and we are really happy about this development. And thank you very much also for the progressive role here to the German government and for the pledge. So the fund is now, in principle, able to work. And we are, of course, looking forward to additional pledges. We are at about, I think, so my latest information are that we are about 400 million now for the Loss and Damage Fund. But of course, we all know that is a very important signal, and it is a great success for the first day of a COP. But we also need, and we know that needs are tremendously in developing countries. So loss and damage needs are estimated to be up to 500 billion in 2030. So the amount needs to grow, of course. So we are looking forward to more pledges. Additional to that, we would like the German government to ensure that development cooperation, adaptation, and also dealing with losses and damages is always geared towards the needs of the most affected. And that is also, of course, why our first ask, participation and inclusion of those affected, is very, very important. And we would also ask the government to support vulnerable countries in anchoring human mobility in the national adaptation and disaster risk management, disaster management plans, and to contribute, of course, to finance those plans and its implementation. My last slide, please. Thank you.
Yeah,
so
Vera, you should also finish within 1 minute.
Okay, just one very, very short last thing, because I think that's very important as we're here at COP28 and we now have the decision on the Loss and Damage Fund. I just wanted to point out why it is also so important in the context of human mobility, and that is because the scope clearly points towards also human mobility. So we see in the text that the fund will provide finance inter alia for dealing with displacement, relocation, and migration, and for promoting equitable, safe, dignified human mobility in the form of displacement, relocation, and migration, temporary or permanently. And I think that's, from my perspective, very important to mention here. And yeah, I can close with that. Thank you very much for your attendance.
Thank you, Vera. And I think you made a very important point at the end, the scope of the fund. That's like the hottest topic here today, tomorrow, yesterday, and see what head of states are pledging now into the fund. Certainly also something that we will discuss with the German government. And we will discuss it surely also here in the question and answer. You mentioned the importance of the Nansen Initiative as much as Mitika already pointed out in his presentation. I'm glad that Olivian is with us from the former Nansen Initiative, now Platform for Disaster Displacement. Please,
Thank you, Sabine. Thank you to everyone. And again, apologize from Atle, our head of secretariat, who had to miss this wonderful event. I'll try to fill in his shoes. So the platform on disaster displacement, I feel like everything has been said already, but we are a state-led initiative, and we have Germany in our steering group. And we work towards better protection of persons displaced in the context of climate change. I want to take a brief moment to thank again Germany, and especially German Federal Foreign Office and BMZ for their continuous generous support. I'm here today to talk a bit about the international legal and policy landscape around protection of people in the context of climate change. But first, I would like to make a distinction between internal and cross-border displacement. So in theory, internal displacement happens within a state and its citizens moving in their own country. Legally, their state should be the one providing them protection, and there is no legislation gaps there. But what we can do at the international level is push for more social protection schemes and maybe raise a bit more awareness around international displacement. When it comes to cross-border displacement, though, that's a bit more of a challenge. So as it was mentioned, we have the Refugee Convention, but unless there is a nexus with conflict, it doesn't apply to people being compelled to move in the context of climate change. We also have human rights law. I mean, it's a universal application. It should protect or at least ensure fundamental human rights, but it doesn't really offer an international solution for return, free movement. There is a lot of gaps around this. So what we have identified at the PDD as a sort of solution or more best approach would be what we call the toolbox approach. So that has been identified after Nansen Initiative, which is part of our protection agenda that was endorsed in 2015. And there's a few benefits on this approach. First, it accounts for the different circumstances during which migration or displacement occur. Depending on which region you come from, and we have seen this with two beautiful interventions today, displacement doesn't happen for the same reason. People will maybe be forced to move in the Caribbean because a hurricane happened. In the Pacific, it would be because of sea level rise, and it could happen because of drought in East Africa. And having one solution for all different regional circumstances could be difficult. And then again, migration often also happens for a multitude of reasons at the same time. For example, if we are talking about hurricane, it's not just about climate change, it's also a lack of preparedness in advance. So it's very multi-causal. And then another good benefit of this toolbox approach would be also not to touch upon the Refugee Convention. This wonderful instrument is quite fragile. It's not well respected everywhere. And there have been a few voices that raised their concerns that if we expand the Refugee Convention, it could harm its application. And also being very practical, it doesn't appear to have a lot of political will to create a new convention, especially for disaster displacement. So what do we do in the meantime? We try to use the tool that we have. For example, we can harness a regional refugee convention who have a bit more climate change consideration. We can use complementary pathways and push for more to be created. We can use humanitarian instruments, such as the humanitarian visa, like the Argentinian has created. We can also help and support states have a better domestic state protection, and also, like I said, same as for internal displacement, social protection. And there are a lot of great tools out there. We have just heard about the very recent Pacific Framework on climate mobility. There is also a very recent Australian Tuvalu. There are free movement schemes. But between all of those tools, there is quite a lack of coordination. And at the international level, what we could do is maybe work on strengthening, harmonizing those tools, making sure we are using them, and maybe strengthen what we already have before trying to find something else. And that will also involve breaking silos. A lot of people are working on those fields in different departments: migration department, climate change department, disaster reduction department, which doesn't really help affected communities. We can also, and that's what we do a lot at the PDD, develop specific guidance for region, for states, and notably on the application of regional migration or refugee legislation or policies. And since we are COP, I can't not mention that we also need to push to have disaster displacement consideration in climate change policy. I won't really expand on the loss and damage. It was beautifully presented. But on the other side, we could do the same in migration policies. We can push for disaster displacement consideration in those spheres. For example, complementary between the Global Compact on Migration, the Global Compact on Refugee, within the Sendai Framework on Disaster Risk Reduction. And I think it's very timely this year that we have the COP just before the Global Refugee Forum. And we should really take advantage of these spaces to highlight the link between those and really ensure the protection of those people that sadly falls in these gaps. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Oliviane. You mentioned something, you said things are there that could help, but it lacks of coordination and also, that's what I say, of political will as well. And, but the instruments would be there that we could work with. And I would like to hand over now to Pia. And Pia, I would like to ask you to outline what the German government is already doing in this. Please take your mic.
Yeah, thanks a lot for also having me here. And yeah, thank you also to our experts for sharing their insights. Yeah, so what is important is that the protection of people and the element of choice in this very complex and diverse spectrum of human mobility in the context of climate change is recognized. This is one essential point. The other one is that we really need to link the climate and the mobility agenda here. So we heard a lot about the sectoral silos, and there are several ways of how we try to address this. And yeah, I think it became very clear that taking different approaches and different actions to respond to these very different forms of human mobility in the context of climate change are very important. But first of all, also because we are at COP, that we really need an ambitious and inclusive climate policy and action. That's what the negotiation team is here for of Germany. They are working really hard. We also need to focus on, of course, adaptation to mitigate the impacts on livelihoods, what we heard here. And yeah, we are very proud that the Loss and Damage Fund got kickstarted yesterday and that it has the strong references to human mobility in the context of climate change. So there we are looking forward to implementing it. It will be not easy, I guess, but we have already some funding pledged. And yeah, there we are very happy that this took off. And what is maybe important to mention that the Loss and Damage Fund, but also the funding arrangements have the clear mandate of complementarity. So looking at how different funds and funding instruments are working on loss and damage. So here we see an option for also this coordination on human mobility in the context of climate change. Some other examples of where we could link the two agendas, or where we have plans to do so. So this is definitely the Global Refugee Forum that's just coming up after COP. And here we have a climate action pledge actually to further link the two agendas and make climate action and policy actually more inclusive. So what has been mentioned by our colleagues here. And just to give one really small example compared to all the other big issues we were talking about, one of Germany's main funding instruments for climate finance is the International Climate Initiative. And here we just released a new strategy where we also look at resilience and security. This is what we have on our agenda next. Of course, the initiative focuses on funding for very different aspects, also within different ministries. But we have here also this focus on what are aspects that are usually not covered in climate policy, not traditionally, and how to strengthen this. And maybe to give two other instruments that are very important, and they were also mentioned, so humanitarian action. And there it is actually a priority of the German government to strengthen further anticipatory humanitarian action. That means strengthening early warning, but then also that early warning triggers early action. And 5% of the German humanitarian funding will be dedicated to anticipatory humanitarian action. And actually this tool is the best works best in disaster, climate and weather-related disaster context, so for floods, droughts, and so on. So here we can focus on this specific aspect of disaster displacement. And also because it was mentioned here, we also have in the Foreign Office stabilization, peace building, and crisis prevention as a field of engagement. And there we are increasingly dedicating our peace building and stabilization aspects to also include climate change impacts, to make this more climate sensitive. Because we heard that conflict is also impacted by climate change impacts, and this can then in turn lead to more displacement or and so on. So here we are looking at how to help or facilitate, for example, resource sharing protocols at the local level, at the community level, how to use peace mediation tools to also take climate change impacts into account. Yeah, and this is, of course, I cannot cover everything that the German government is doing. Also, the Development Corporation, for example, is, of course, doing a lot. But just to give you a few highlights in addition to what has been mentioned.
Thank you very much, Pia. Thanks for this great overview that you gave, and also touching on this issue, disaster prevention. Yeah, so. That is definitely a very important part, and I would like now to open the floor and invite all of you also to ask questions, but also you on the panel can ask. We should have now an open dialogue. You can also ask questions and make interventions. But first I would like to give the audience, the patient audience, the floor to ask the first question, please. Yeah.
Thank you so much. I think this is one of the most important conversations that we're having today. My name is Philip Kilonzo. I work with Pan-African Climate Justice Alliance, heading the policy and advocacy work. I'm looking at the map of Africa, and it's increasingly puzzling. Because when I look at how climate change is actually impacting regions and the kind of movements that are happening, migrations that are happening, it seems in very near soon we will be just occupying a quarter of the continent. I'm not too sure whether, as we speak about climate and mobility, we've been able to contextualize issues of climate change in such a context. Because unless we are able to contextualize it in that context, then we'll lose. Number two is about the effectiveness of existing protocols, particularly around conflict, peace, migration, because that is where it evolves. And we've had decades and decades where protocols of such nature were not working. Climate change is now coming in to layer on the inefficiencies around those protocols. I'm not too sure whether we have solutions unless we are able again to rebut on what Dr. Mithika is actually emphasizing, particularly around where global action on climate change rests. Thanks.
Thank you very much for this intervention. I would like to pick up more questions from the audience. Oh yeah, please. Yeah.
Hello, thank you so much. I have a question. So, are there any existing regional framework or partnerships that the international community can leverage to support countries who are facing political instability, conflict like Sudan, in managing this displacement and migration in the context of the climate crisis? Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you very much on that. It was a very concrete question. Please.
Yeah, thank you, panelists. My name is Joseph Kurauka, lecturer, Kenyatta University, and also partner with the Pan-Africa Climate Justice Alliance. I would like to congratulate the presenter from Fiji, but I would like us to get some information regarding the impact, some of the impact you have noted due to climate change on that coastal ecosystem, especially on aquatic resources that our people have been dependent on for decades. Secondly, what are some of the strategies that are put in place by the government of Fiji to cope or to mitigate such nutritional status issues if they are in it? Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now that Atle Solberg came, I would like to welcome him and also pass on one question that was raised from the audience. I will repeat it. There was another one, please. Yeah.
Thank you so much. I'm Elisa Schmidt from Ground Truth Solutions. Thank you for all the panelists, for all the interventions. My question surrounds the participation of affected communities that need to have a voice in the development of these processes. And I'd like to know what are some of the strategies to ensure that that happens and that they have the decision-making power that they need to have. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Christian, please.
Yes, hi. Thank you very much. Christian Wolf, I work for ACT Alliance. We're a global network of faith-based humanitarian development actors, including Bread for the World. Thank you for all your presentations. I think they were very good and very detailed. I'm wondering, maybe a question to the German government, but also to the others who have demands from their governments. We've talked a lot about different funding instruments and different ways to support solutions. I'm wondering on the political side, in the area of providing access for people to pathways when they do need to migrate. Is there some, and there's been a lot of emphasis on regional solutions, and PDD works a lot on that. What do you think a government like Germany can do apart from supporting the PDD, and what do people from other governments think that global North countries can do to have a stronger, sort of more effective discussion around that? Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now I would like to give the mic to Atle. Welcome, Atle, that you're with us. But you were very well replaced here. We did not miss you at all. Olivian did that very well. But there was a specific question from the lady here from South Sudan. From Sudan, who asked, is there a framework that supports people who are on the move from Sudan, right? From Sudan, yes. Maybe you can answer that one.
Thank you, Sabine, and also apologies for being late. I just left another event and I think it's somehow related to that question because it was about the Pacific Regional Framework on Climate Mobility that was endorsed by the Pacific leaders 3 weeks ago in Cook Island. And that is an important tool to start building institutional capacity to respond to some of these challenges. So if I understand the question correctly, it's about Sudan and people being forced to move or compelled to move in the context of that region. So you have tools. You have at continental level, you have the African Refugee Convention that are broader than the Geneva Convention for Refugees. So that's a tool one can consider when situation gets dire. What is very important or interesting from the IGAD region, the Intergovernmental Authority on Development, they have also just recently, a couple of years ago, developed a free movement of person protocol, which also includes in their paragraph 16 explicitly situation of disasters. So there shall be free movement of person across border in a disaster situation. So this is a protocol that has not been domesticated, it has not been implemented through all the national countries, but Sudan, as part of IGAD, could turn to that type of tool. I don't know more specific around the rules or the governance of movement relating to Sudan, but happy to maybe talk to the lady afterwards. But maybe concluding with what I just said, or where I came from, the importance of having policies and tools to manage this, because if we start without those governing framework, the response and the public policies will probably not be sound. So thank you so much for including me already coming late to this side event. Thank you, Sabine.
Poor you. Thank you very much, Atle, for this comment. And then I pick also up now one more question, Lisa, that came here, and it looks like that it applies directly to that. And I would like also then Vera
Sabine?
To answer the next one.
So sorry, I just want to piggyback on what Atle said and the question on Sudan. I think it's more of my opinion as a lawyer than as a PDD member. But I think there is actually research being done on the application of the Africa Refugee Convention around disaster. And UNHCR, with a researcher from the Calder Center, published a paper a few weeks ago about the application of this convention, and especially the article that concern events seriously disturbing public order. So in the case of your region, that could maybe be something to consider. Then there is, of course, the issue of application, but in theory, that's an interesting development, just to point it out.
Thank you very much for this.
Okay, thank you for the opportunity.
Yeah.
My name is Shampiana. I'm from Kenya, and I am an alumni of Nairobi Summer School on Climate Justice by PACJA. So I'm from a community in the northern Kenya. We are mostly pastoralists, and most of the time we are displaced by droughts, and we go in search of pasture for the animals because we are a pastoralist community. So in the midst of this conversation, I was thinking, how can a balance be there, or how can a balance be found to address the need for agricultural innovations, such as genetically modified organisms, to address food security during this drought-induced displacement, while also addressing concerns that are being raised by campaigns against the GMOs? I'd like to hear on that.
Okay, thank you very much. And I would like to give now Vera the floor to pick up some of the questions that were raised here that maybe you want to answer. And then Pia. Yeah, and of course, yeah, we go then on. Or Vera, would you like to give it a go?
No, Pia can start.
Okay, then Pia, please.
There were some very specific questions to German government.
Yeah, of course. Pia, please.
Yeah, thank you for all the questions, and I will address particularly the one on the funding and siloed approaches there, but also other avenues that we need to take. And I think there are efforts ongoing on actually break the silos between different funding streams, between different policy instruments, but it's of course a long way to go because systems are set up in a certain way. And maybe one example is the humanitarian development peace nexus, where it's actually, we're trying to, work better between these instruments and then also bringing then the climate change aspect in. It is a challenge, but there are several good examples of where it works, but it's not the fully fledged solution for everything. And on the second thing on how we need to think about more what the Global North can do, and I think your second question was hinting towards kind of offering specific visa. And and there the example of Australia and Tuvalu is interesting to actually offer this kind of visa support for as a last resort for resettlement and relocation. And I think there, not only Germany, but also other governments, and there I can speak more for the Federal Foreign Office, we need to engage our ministries of interior to work on solutions. And I think maybe Vera can take up the point of what you have found in the research, that in some decisions the impacts of climate change are actually already taken on board, but it's not in a systematic way. Yeah.
Please, Vera, would you like to?
Yes, I can do that. So what I said on the cases where German courts already include environmental conditions in the review of that was focused on deportation decisions, and there were examples. It was a paper by a German judge, and she investigated on specific cases where environmental conditions has been taken into account. That was, of course, not the main reason in all of those cases, but it has been used for arguing on why why a situation has not been secure enough to take deportation decisions. And there were examples on Afghanistan, Iraq, and Somalia, where there have been droughts and water and food shortages as a result of those droughts. It just shows that there's a growing there's a development that those conditions are taking into account have been taken into account much more, and I think it can develop it can be a trend. We don't know that yet, but I found it a very interesting finding from that paper I read on it.
Thank you very much. James, you also would like to answer some of the questions that were addressed to you, or make an intervention.
Yeah. Thank you, Sabine, and thank you to our audience for questions. I was a member of the technical advisory group for the Pacific Climate Change Mobility Framework that is now being adopted by the Pacific Islands Forum. And I think, this is an important, as I mentioned earlier, it's what we want to have in our back pocket, even though it is the last resort. But I think in the context of working with affected communities and the role of accompaniment with communities, I think that's an important thing to engage in this process. And Bread for the World has working with one of our colleagues, the Pacific Islands Association for NGOs, PIANGO, and the Fiji Council of Social Services on something in terms of accompanying a community that is being forced to relocate as a result of climate-induced disasters and rising sea levels. But I think one of the challenges that we face in this is that we find communities especially vulnerable, and nations are struggling to keep up. So, for example, with the aquaculture issue, we're lucky we have our indigenous knowledge still. but indigenous knowledge needs to keep up with the change that's happening in climate, right? And so we need to keep adapting in that sense. And I think we are falling behind in that aspect. And that's going to then lead to what happens when the ocean no longer provides the sustenance we need. We've had Tuvalu, Kiribati experiencing 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 months of drought. And they, unlike landlocked countries or bigger countries, or bigger continents, they have nowhere to go to search for fresh water. They have to import it, or they start to look at those migration issues. That leads to some serious sovereignty issues. So the question around the recent arrangement between Australia and Tuvalu, which will start to take 258 people a year from Tuvalu to Australia in exchange for the security sovereignty of a country. So we need to start looking at some of those and challenging some of these things that are being offered to the communities. And that's why the framework is very, very important. So now that we have this climate mobility framework, we need to see how it is implemented, particularly in bilateral relations with communities. And I think this is where, as we look at the funding around loss and damage, what are those processes that need to be invested in as we look at loss and damage? So, we have the framework. We now need to look at all those aspects of the framework and invest money into those processes and protocols. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mitika, you are also a strong advocate for the Loss and Damage Fund that was established yesterday. So far, around, I don't know what the number is now. My last update was that we are at around now 460 million US dollar, if I'm right. If I count right, that Canada pledged something this morning. Was that right? Yeah. And what expectations do you have on this fund in terms of how it can help human mobility?
Yeah. So, Sabine, you are my great friend, and my friends all over. Now I'm not talking about Mithika, but we had a press conference yesterday, and what we said is we have a loss and damage fund, and we have come from far to have such a fund. There is one thing having a fund and capitalizing it. Somebody has mentioned that we require 500 billion US dollars really to satisfy really the need of the people. I want to ask you, if you talk about 460 million, what is that you are talking about? And you find people celebrating it, that now that's a milestone. I think for us, we want to be very cautious. And we want really our governments, we can't divert our attention on the real issues, for instance, of adaptation and loss and damage that we have delivered, because we have the framework, we have everything. Now is implementation. We want it capitalized. I was just scanning when we mentioned that 460. I looked at the internet. Saudi Arabia itself is paying Cristiano Ronaldo per year 213 million US dollars. So in 10 years, you can imagine how much money you will be paid just as an individual. And then the whole group of heads of states comes here and pledge just that money, which one person is being paid. I think we are not being very serious. This is a joke. Let us be serious. I think, and they should not say that there is no money in this situation. I want to tell you, there is, when COVID-19 struck, we saw massive resource mobilization in this world. In 3 months, we had mobilized trillions and trillions of dollars, either for vaccine development or vaccine deployment, and we defeated COVID-19 within a short time. It's a crisis like climate crisis. It's displacing people, millions of people, Pacific Islands, in Africa, everywhere, in Sudan, they are being displaced. Why then do we have a problem of money? We come here and just contribute just a token which can pay a footballer, then we are praising them. No, we are not going to praise them. Yes. We want them to put money into climate finance, into adaptation, into mitigation, into loss and damage. So that our position is that, in fact, we are very gloomy. As PACJA, we are not celebrating. We want more money here. The other one, let's mention one point about the involvement of the community. If you find that lady who was speaking, she had to come, leave Sudan, there is war there, and travel to Ethiopia to take a flight here. That's how involvement and the issue of procedural justice, not only at global level, but also how do we ensure that those people at the last mile are involved. I know German Watch. I know we are working with German Watch. I know Bread for the World can go up to the deep as possible. But I think we need to build that North-South collaboration, like the way we are doing here. We need really to convince our governments. You need to convince, and because sometimes it is beyond you, because now the politics, the context of politics in a country like Germany, we need the German population to understand that so that you address the crisis which right-wing people like Marine Le Pen in Germany, in France, and in Germany, the right-wing movement, which is really fighting back that we don't want refugees from Africa. How do you use frameworks like this one? You support people so that they live. They don't migrate into and drawn in Mediterranean because they want. They are running away from this crisis, from these atrocities. So I think we need really, in that, we need to share, build North-South collaboration and the movement so that we can also make people understand why the German government is really investing in helping this cause. Is not a charity to Africa. It's not charity to, it's really to keep off, because when you do not do it, we are going to come anyway and invade you, because we are not going to go. We will cross with the boats and what, and come and to Germany and Europe and elsewhere. We need to work together. This is a crisis for all of us. We need to find a way, because we are in this planet. You can see they are going to Australia, and more important, as things become worse and worse, they are not going to accept to grow together. All of us will drown. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Mitika. That was strong and absolutely needed, and we have a long history working together, advocating and making big polluters, asking big polluters, and not politely asking, putting pressure on them to pay and also to fill the loss and damage fund. And our target was always clearly on industrialized countries, but you touched it now as well. I mean, we are here in this country, we see the wealth that was made on oil and gas, and we know the same. You also addressed Saudi Arabia that spends millions on Cristiano Ronaldo, and you made a point that it would also be urgent. Can you imagine that African states would put pressure on Saudi Arabia to pay into the loss and damage fund? Because so far we have not heard that in the plenary. That would be a massive step, because the fund is now there and it should be filled by all of them. I would like now to give our audience final words, maybe 1-2 minutes for a final remark that you would like to do, and I would like to start with you, make the round, and then end here with Vera, please.
I don't know if you want to take the floor, but since my colleague finally joined us, I don't know if you want.
You can also both make an intervention. That's fine, please.
Perfect. Then first, thank you so much to everyone. Very enriching panel. And I think it's very interesting coming from PDD. We heard also loud and clear. And it's even more relevant now with the Loss and Damage Fund decision to have affected community voice there, to have them more included as well, and not just to work for them, but listening to them a bit more, having them telling us what to do instead of the other way, and trying to work, like you said, together. And we are all together in this, and it doesn't make sense to work in silos by countries. So I think it's a bit off track, but my last words. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Applause to Oliviane. Please, Pia.
Yeah, also thank you for having me here, and I also heard you loud and clear, and will take this up with my teams and in the Foreign Office, definitely. But I take away definitely that we need strong civil society to advocate for the cause, but also to show the evidence, to contribute to research and so on. So we need that definitely, because the to-do list is very long, the challenges are there. And a second point is that we definitely, we are working on this, but definitely we have a long way to go to integrate the different sectors we are working in to address these interconnected challenges. So that's what I take with me also back to Berlin. And I'm looking forward to engaging further with you, speaking with you, hearing from your experiences while being here at COP. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. I think our guests you both should have the last word. So I hand over now to Vera.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think my last words would be that as we have seen, we should never lose in those international contexts and in those negotiations, never lose the connection to the local level, to what the needs on the ground really are, and what it means, how we can translate it into situations and negotiations here. I think that's what we should keep in mind always. And thanks again very much.
Thank you very much. Lisa, would you like to give the mic to Atle?
No, thank you so much. And thank you, Oliviane, for real teamwork. We are in two places at the same time and very much advocating for the same. And I'm very encouraged. I will not pretend that I've understood what you have talked about, but I think it's landing on very much communities are affected, communities have rights to be included and consulted, and that is also where solutions are. So we never lose sight of that. So thank you so much and congratulations for an excellent event. Thank you.
Thank you very much. James Mitticker, you both presented here the struggle of the local people, and you should have the last words.
Yeah, mine is just to reiterate that we have the solution. The people have the solution. If only there is that political will, and if governments acknowledge the moment of time where we are, that we need, wherever you are in the world, we need really to find a solution. We need to work together. And so I want to really commend the Brand for the World and Venro. But I want to mention that this is not an end in itself. I think we need these conversations. We need them with people. We need them where we come from. We need to work together. People really need to understand. I think we are so much preaching to the already converted, so that most of the, whether you are, that ignorance at local level is what we need to fight, because once people understand, then they are going to take action. I normally tell people, like, look at the government, the current Danish government. It is elected mostly on the mandate on climate change. I know the German, of course, the Green Party and those progressives are done well, but we need more awareness. They need experiences from where, because most of them act out of ignorance. Our people also need to understand the context. So we need really to build this movement, cross-border, north-south, south-south collaboration. And I think we cannot really lose this moment. And thank you very much once again for really this. I need one of the brand from the world, German Watch and those others, are one of the key organizations which are driving this. We need to work together for the interest of the current and the future generations. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mitika. James?
I think very important just to reiterate, especially with our representative from the German government here, that these processes need to be community-led. So facilitate the community in helping design the processes within the frameworks that have been developed by the states. That's very important. Otherwise, you end up people building houses with no kitchens and things like that because women are not involved in the conversation, or the design of the community doesn't factor in that they have to then walk a certain distance for water and things like that. And finally, this issue is the last resort issue. So while we work on this, while we work on those communities that are currently being affected and relocated, displaced, etc., we cannot lose sight of the other work on mitigation. And we need the developed countries to not only put money into relocation and all that sort of thing, but we need them to step up on the 1.5. That's our life in the Pacific. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I also would like to say a word of thanks because this side event is not hosted by Bread for the World. We are a member of Klimaallianz, Climate Alliance Germany and FENRO. Both our networks are hosting this side event, and we are actually very, very grateful that they provided that space for us, that we can discuss this important topic. And I also don't talk now too much, I guess, Lisa, if I mention that both networks are developing now a publication with policy recommendations. It's focused on the German government, but it provides us also a reason to come back, hopefully next year, and to discuss our policy recommendations during the year on certain occasions. I'm sure definitely at the intersessions in Bonn or at the next COP, wherever it takes place. And I would like to thank now all of you for actively engaging, and Vera from Bonn, that you that you're with us here, and Atle, that he came at the end. Thank you very much. Goodbye.
Welcome to the German Climate Pavilion at COP28 in Dubai. Ambitious, just together.